Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. We just wanted to let our listeners know that Sarah McDugal was in a car crash about a month ago, and we've been keeping her in our prayers. And they have a GoFundMe page set up to help with her recovery and expenses, and they're about halfway there on what they're wanting to reach. So if you're interested in supporting Sarah's GoFundMe, you can go to that directly through the GoFundMe website, which is GoFundMe.com, and you can search for Sarah McDugal's car crash recovery. Her last name is McDugal, and we are definitely keeping Sarah in our prayers.
Yes. And when I messaged Sarah letting her know we were going to release this 4 Seasons of Healing, she wanted me to mention to you guys that she's offering a free course. It's called Is It Abuse? Recognizing Red Flags. And you can get to that course by going to ideservetoknow.com/isthisabuse, and I will put that link in the show notes.
Yeah, so that'd be a quick way for people to find a free course.
Yeah. All right, so what are we saying now? We're about to release some safety planning podcasts in the next few weeks. So I wanted to just release this 4 Seasons of Healing for our listeners and any victims to realize how important safety is, which is the first step in Seasons of Healing. So here it is.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Karen Wonder. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. On today's podcast, we have Sarah McDugal. She's an author, a speaker, trainer, and abuse recovery coach who works with women wounded by abuse in the faith community. Sad to say that's even an issue, but unfortunately it is. So welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. It's going to be good.
Here is the 4 Seasons of Healing.
We see this happen over and over and over again. The victim is told, you just need to stop being bitter. You just need to forgive, let bitterness go. And yet they are not rescued or gotten safe. And they're living in ongoing abuse. Now, when we see that happen, very often it is not out of malice on the part of the clergy. Now, caveat, there are some clergy that are just downright evil. It happens. But much of the time, the clergy members or the Christian counselors that are advocating this approach, they're not trying to be harmful. They're not trying to get women assaulted and killed. They just don't realize that while forgiveness is really, really important, it cannot happen in the early stages of seasons of healing. And there are 4 seasons of healing. And I talk about these in depth in my own. So I know you took the victim advocacy course, but I also have an online course, a 36 lesson course called Shiro, Your Wild Guide to Warrior After Abuse. And in that, I have an entire module on the 4 seasons of healing. So those seasons of healing are safety, stability, strength, and Shiro. We cannot start with spiritual strength activities like forgiveness when someone is not safe or stable. Forgiveness is vital. Forgiveness needs to happen. It can't be rushed. It can't be forced. It can't be demanded. And it only happens from a place of strength.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yes.
When clergy members jump to the spiritual response, they're acting out of theological training or mistraining, but they're not acting out of trauma training. Well, most clergy members have 0 trauma training in the first place. So they may be well-intentioned, but still creating incredible damage and harm without even realizing it, because they're operating under the construct of, hey, let's get to the spiritual solution here. And they don't realize that the spiritual solution has to be considered and experienced from a place of strength. The first season of healing is safety. If you are in survival mode, and you guys have both experienced things, right? So if you're in survival mode and you're worried about whether or not you're going to be verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, whether or not you can feed your children, whether or not you need to go to the domestic violence shelter, whether or not you're going to lose all your friends if you tell someone, whether or not if you've escaped, you're ever going to be able to go back and get the rest of your clothes, whether or not you can get a job, whether or not you can afford daycare when you don't have a job. But how do you go to job interviews when you don't have daycare? How do you put your baby into a place that's safe when your kids aren't old enough for school, but you can't get a job without putting them in school, but there's no school that will take them that young, and you can't afford to get a house because you don't have a job, but you can't get a job because you don't have school. I mean, it's like the snake eating its own tail, right?
Yeah.
So, and when people think, well, why don't women just leave? They have no idea.
Right.
How many, unless you've been there, how many obstacles there are. And if you are a woman who didn't have like a postgraduate education, even if you are a woman who did that, you're still facing many of these obstacles. If your name is not on your mortgage, if your name is not on your lease, if your car is not in your name, if you don't have access to the bank accounts, if your kids, let's say, have been homeschooled, or they're in private school and you're soon not going to be able to afford it. Or if you need to flee and then suddenly your kids aren't on the bus route for public school anymore. Like, what do you do with all of these obstacles? And it is paralyzing. So the first thing that has to happen is not forgiveness, but safety. And then safety needs to be taking place as a standard, as a baseline for long enough to allow the victim to transition into the second season of healing. And that is stability. Stability only happens when safety has been around for a while, right?
Yes.
So you've had a job now. You can pay your bills now. You aren't worried about whether or not you can take your kids to get a burrito at Taco Bell now. You're not triple checking the locks on your doors and windows every night and then getting up 2 or 3 times at night because there was a weird sound now. So all of that safety needs to, like those crashing waves, need to kind of flatline into stability. And stability needs to be present for a significant period of time in order for your brain to move out of what we call amygdala hijack. I don't know if you guys have talked about neuroscience at all, but when we're yeah. So, I mean, and I'm not a neuroscientist or a medical doctor or a psychiatrist. So this is just like bird's eye overview for the layperson, right? But if we're living in constant fear and hypervigilance, then our planning and strategy, our forebrain has been taken over, hijacked by the amygdala, the fear response. Mm-hmm. So we're living in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. Those are the 4 trauma responses, right? So if you're living in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, then you're not able, you don't have the mental bandwidth, and it has nothing to do with your IQ. I mean, you just don't have the mental bandwidth to make long range, strategically oriented, wise decisions. You're thinking with your hand right in front of your face, not long term.
Right.
And that's okay, because that's how our brain is wired and created by God to get us through survival mode.
Yeah. Different stages. That makes sense.
Yes. So, but at some point you have to move out of survival mode if you want to stay alive. Extended lengths of time in survival mode. There's a lot of medical terms for things like this, like complex PTSD, complex trauma. It's basically like the difference between being in a car wreck, that's a one-time trauma, and living in a war zone for a decade. That's a complex trauma that's ongoing. You can't escape it until you finally do. And then you have to learn completely fresh sets of coping mechanisms out in the normal world, because what kept you alive is not going to keep you healthy and stable once you're out of the war zone.
Right.
They were perfect skills for the war zone, but they're not healthy skills for stability. So the season of stability is where we have to relearn those skills and come out of that amygdala hijack, come out of the middle brain. And then after we've been in that season for long enough that it becomes our normal, then we're ready to move into strength. And strength is where sometimes these things start to bubble up again. In survival mode, you stuff everything down because you're braver and stronger and more courageous than you ever imagined you could be, especially if you have kids, because you have to survive. And then later, when your body knows that you're safe enough, all of a sudden you fall apart. And you may fall apart emotionally. I know of a woman who, a friend of mine, author, speaker, terrific, amazing person, went through years of trauma in a marriage, finally got out, did the courageous warrior survivor thing, got remarried, and was living in safety and completely fell apart. Crying all the time, couldn't make decisions, had to quit her teaching job, all the things she loved, she was just suddenly completely unable to do. At the point where she was safe, she was loved, she was protected, she was no longer in any form of danger, emotionally, spiritually, physically, she fell apart. And I see this happen to so many women, either emotionally falling apart or their physical health implodes on them finally because their body and their mind and their heart is free to stop holding it together with this iron-knuckled grip. And that happens once they're past safety and stability. When women experience this breakdown, it can happen emotionally, it can happen physically with their health falling apart. And sometimes it also happens spiritually with suddenly they're deconstructing everything they believed in at one point. So whether it's happening on just one of those levels or all of them, a lot of times I hear women asking, well, but I feel like I'm going crazy now. Like, what's wrong? I thought I was better. And the answer to that is you are finally safe enough to fall apart. That means this is strength.
Wow.
You are moving into strength because you've been safe and stable long enough that your body doesn't have to be a hero anymore. So it's a good sign. It's a sign of healing. Now, don't stay there. Don't wallow down in it and then refuse to move on. But this is where we enter into strength because now we are able to assess the things that happen to us with more detachment. We're able to discuss the beliefs that held us where we were. We're able to get our bodies treated for things and for issues that we may have ignored in survival mode. And that's when you realize all this stuff you've been dealing with. Maybe you have an autoimmune issue. Maybe you've gotten cancer. Maybe you've dealt with epigenetic stuff and all of a sudden your body's gone haywire because your trauma has flipped your DNA switches and you're dealing with stuff that is just bizarre. And so whatever it is, it's because you're safe. And it's actually a sign of moving into strength. And it's only after we go through all of that that we can really dig down into forgiveness.
So it's definitely further on down the path.
Way down.
Yeah.
When you're going through survival in safety and trying to attain stability, it's really easy to start feeling foggy and forgetful and disoriented. And I strongly encourage those in those seasons to document the heck out of their everyday. So whether that is in a paper journal or in an encrypted app on your phone or something, keep track of what you're going through, because at some point when you are ready to take that scope of woundedness and forgive, you're going to need to be able to look back on the things that are happening to you right now. So right now is not the time to forgive them. Right now is the time to document them so that someday you have an accurate picture of what was done to you. You can actually process through it more quickly. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until random memories are triggered by some innocent comment or smell or situation or sound or song or experience. And then you get knocked flat. And then you're like, wow, what is wrong with me? And maybe you figure it out, or maybe you don't, that this is bringing up a memory of something that was done to you, part of your scope of woundedness. And then you end up dealing with it 20 years down the road. If you're an advocate who's helping someone and you're able to tell them this early enough in their journey, that documentation will mean that when they are ready to forgive, they can actually get that fuller picture of it and deal with a lot of those trauma triggers in a healthier way, much more quickly than if they have to discover them one at a time in this trickling disclosure of their own triggers.
Wow. And I did write everything down without realizing that that was healthy, and then took that to my EMDR therapist and went through all that. So I'm glad I did all that.
Yeah, that's awesome. But you know, a lot of people don't realize how important it is. And I mean, really good documentation is super important for court. It's super important if you have a custody battle.
Right.
It's super important for any kind of legal or criminal things. It's just a good idea, but it's also really healing.
Yes.
Yeah, my journals are healing. Even look at my old journals are very validating to me.
Yes, exactly. It reminds you that it was not all in your head.
Right, exactly.
I have yet to meet a perpetrator of abuse who doesn't scream victim and who doesn't say, oh, she's abusing me. Do you see what kind of crazy I have to put up with? And turn the clergy against the victim. So allowing an abusive person to experience the full weight of their consequences that they have earned by their sinful choices when they are not repentant is the most loving and merciful thing we can do, because that is what gives the greatest chance of them choosing repentance and to transform and to turn away from hurting other people.
Wow.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for being on the podcast. I was just wondering if you could tell our listeners where to find you on social media and how to find your materials.
Definitely. I'm happy to share that. So my most active platform is Facebook, and you can find me at Sarah McDugal Author on Facebook, and I spell McDugal, McDugal. You can also get to all of my social media platforms, and I'm on YouTube, a lot of stuff on Instagram and Facebook, and you can get to all of those from my website, and that is Wilderness to Wild, 3 words all together, wilderness2wild.com. And that comes from guiding women out of the wilderness, which is what abuse feels like you're wandering in the desert, and into the wild. So wilderness2wild.com. I have a bunch of giveaways and free resources. I have a 40+ page advocacy resource list with the domestic violence resources for links for domestic violence for more than 150 countries, plus book lists and apps and articles and YouTube channels and podcasts and just all kinds of recommended resources there.
Yeah, and I saw you had some ebooks on there too. You had talked about Shiro, that new course. There's also information on your website for that, right?
Yes, just a bunch of stuff, all kinds of stuff on the website.
That's great.
So definitely go check everything out on the website, connect on social media. I would love to send me a message either through the website. You can chat, or on Facebook page or Instagram. And yeah, if you have any questions or anything that you want further clarified, now you know where to find me.
Yeah.
I love what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, we appreciate your passion. We appreciate all your great information. I was taking notes. You're always in a learning cycle. So I just appreciate all the information you gave and all the resources you have on your website. So thank you so much, Sarah.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
To learn more about the 4th season of healing, or to learn about the 4 seasons of healings, go to www.wildtowilderness.com. That's WILD to wilderness.com. Or you could Google the 4 Seasons of Healing with Sarah McDugal. She has great resources on her website that are so helpful. And thank you for listening to this podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.